Okay, class, I'm going to do a video over factoring. Now, notice that this says review. The reason that this says review is this is something you're expected to have learned in Algebra 1. So I'm going to create this video to put it out there so that if you need to go over it a couple times, you'll have access to this. So I know that they want me to factor by finding my GCF, which is my greatest common factor. So I know that to do that, I know that both of these are divisible by 3. So I know that's going to give me a 3, and then I'm going to have a 2x minus 3. And that's as far as I can take that, so I will be done. Now over here, I'm going to ask myself, what can I divide, what is 9 and 5 both divisible by that's the same? And there is nothing. So I do understand that in this case, it is prime, and I can't take that any further. So now let's go down and look at the other two examples. I'm going to pause your video if you need time to write that down. So now when I'm trying to figure out how to factor this, I know that I'm going to have to figure out what is two terms that I can multiply and get a 20, but add and get a 9. So I know I'm going to have two terms because this is squared. So I know I'm going to have an x and an x. That's going to give me an x squared. So when I start listing my factors of 20, I know I would have a 1 and a 20, a 2 and a 10, and then I would have a 4 and a 5. And the only two that I can combine to get a 9 would be the 4 and the 5. And because they're both positive, this would both be positive. So now let's do the same for the 28. So again, I know I'm going to have two terms. I'm going to have an x and an x. So then you would start thinking about all your factors of 28, and I would come to the conclusion that I would have to use a 7 and a 4. And because I want to multiply two numbers and get a positive 8, but add them and get a negative 11, I know both of those will have to be a negative. So let's go on to the third term now, or the third set of problems. So when I go down to factor these, I know again that I'm going to have two terms. But the difference here is I know one's going to have to be a 2x and one's going to have to be an x.
Teachers and students, please pardon this interruption, as I do have a brief few announcements before the bell rings at 11:30. Teachers and students, please be aware that today, due to inclement weather, today is tonight's for.
Okay, sorry for that interruption. Let's keep going. And I know the only thing that's going to give me a 1 is for me to have a 1 and a 1. But I know I'm going to have to test it to see if I can get this middle term. So remember, to test it, you got to test this. 1 times x is going to give me a 1x. 2x times 1 is going to give me a 2x. And when I add those together, I will indeed get a 3x. So I know that that's correct. So that would be my solution. So we're going to do the same now for the next problem. So I know here, there's a couple of things I can use to get a 6x squared. I can try 6x and 1, but I know a 6 and a 1 is going to end up giving me a 5, and the numbers aren't that big. So I know I'm going to try 2x and a 3x. And I know the only thing that'll give me a 1 is a 1 and a 1. Now I got to figure out my signs. So I know 1 times 3x is going to give me a 3x. And 2x times 1 is going to give me a 2x. Well, I want that middle term to be a negative x, and I know that my bigger number has to be negative, which is the 3x, and the 3x is attached here. So that's going to be negative, and that's going to be positive. Remember to pause the video if you need more time. Now, with that being said, I want you to understand you can always go back and test it. When you get an answer and you're not quite sure if you got the signs right, let's go back and test it, which is by foiling or by distributing both numbers. So I know 2x times 3x is going to give me 6x squared. And I know 2x times 1 is going to give me 2x. I know negative 1 times 3x is going to give me negative 3x. And I know negative 1 times positive 1 is going to give me a negative 1. When I combine my two middle terms, I'm going to end up with 6x squared. minus x and minus 1. And that is the same as I started off with, so I know I'm correct. Okay, so let's do the last two. Remember to pause your video if you need it. So now I'm going to go down to factoring two squares or perfect squares. So when I look at this one, I know that both of those I can take the square root of and get a number. So because of that, if you remember the rule, I know the only thing that I can multiply by itself and get x squared is x. Only thing I can multiply by 64 and get 8 is 8 and 8, or multiply by itself and get 8. And one has to be positive and one has to be negative because that's the rule. And you can always foil that out to make sure that you're right. Now what about on this next one? So I know that I'm going to have two terms. And remember again, I know it's going to have to be a j and a j. What can I multiply and get a 25 but add and get a 10? That will be a 5. Oh, got to make room for my k here. So let me just rewrite this just a little bit. So I know that I would have j and j, and I would have to have 5k and 5k. And because this is positive, they will both have to be negative. And I can write that as j minus 5k squared. So remember to pause it if you have any questions. Have a good night.